It's great to have this opportunity to talk to you today. It was talking about our recent work, and I think it's fair to say that recently social networking has become somewhat synonymous with all the things that Julie was talking about, Facebook, Twitter, and that kind of thing. And what we'd like to do in the course of the next 40 minutes is to take another sort of sideways step and to tell you something about perhaps a more overlooked but massively useful source of social networking and connectivity with an audience, and that is discussion forums, which were mentioned by Julie. And what we've been doing over the past few years is highlighting what we think are some fascinating facts and findings about who the people are who use discussion forums, how and why do they interact with this medium. And along the way, what this has allowed us to do is to enable us to garner some information that could be helpful to organisations who are hoping to try and think about ways of improving the social connectivity of their client base. So we are talking about, as Julie used the term, a tradigital kind of technology, and hopefully we'll be able to convince you by the end that it sits alongside these other more famous technologies equally well. Just to set the scene, I think what's going to be most helpful is to say how we came to be doing this research in the first place, okay? And I want to take you back a few years to, I suppose, 2005 perhaps, when I was preparing to become a parent for the second time around. Now, as many of you in the audience will probably know, there is a lot of information about how to be a good parent, and it's never more so the case since online media have become more active. There is a fact out there, a source of information for you about every single aspect of parenting. Now, I thought I'd got most things pretty much licked the first time round. I thought I knew what I was doing. Second time around, I thought, well, you know what? There's one thing I'd like to know more about. I recalled my own experiences, first time round as a bona fide Pampers user, and the amount of nappies I sent to landfill every week in my dustbin. And I started to think, there is apparently an alternative. Is it a viable one? Is it a sensible one? I really don't know. I want to find out some more information. How did I find out this information? What was I going to do? Well, the problem was I was looking at a topic that there wasn't a lot of support for in my local community. People who use cloth nappies were a little bit, sorry Steve, because I know your partner has used them on her child, weird. And the perception was that they were somehow a little bit environmental, lentil-eating people who probably I didn't really think I would have much to do with, and I couldn't find any where I lived. I didn't live in Totnes. I lived somewhere else. So what I did was I turned to the place that everybody turns to, I think, nowadays, when they're trying to find out more information, and that was I turned to Google. And what I found was that as I turned to Google, I got over 2 million hits. Okay, just putting cloth nappy in as a search term, I was overwhelmed. And as I scrolled down, what I began to see was this term that I'd heard of, but didn't have a very, very strong sense of what it was, which was online discussion forums. And forums existed to talk about this very, very topic, which struck me as bizarre, and also I really felt that probably I wasn't going to have too much to do with these sorts of outlets. But actually, as I hit a few and opened a few and started to look, there's an example here. This one is called Cloth Nappy Tree. It's a very successful cloth nappy forum. I could see quite a lot of information was available. I could see it was possible for newcomers, welcome newcomers, to find connectivity with other users. There was a source of information. There was a source of more general chat. It wasn't just simply a question of information. And actually, I was realizing quite quickly as I started to look at the content of some of these discussion threads more closely that there was quite a lot of activity going on, and there were a lot of people talking and connecting to each other in a way hitherto unknown to me, albeit about a topic at that stage I knew nothing about. And I did what lots of people do in this situation to start with. I lurked, which I think is a really unpleasant term, very seedy sounding term, which simply means I just looked. I saw what was going on. I noticed who was posting questions. I noticed if they were the kinds of questions that I wanted to have answered, just to get a feel for, oh, is that the sort of thing that I could confidently ask a question about, or would it seem really stupid? And what I realized was people got things answered very quickly, but all sorts of other things came out into the mix as well, okay? So what also happened was that I decided to actually get involved myself with these forums. And I found that the forum was a very, very rich source of information, certainly. Now, I'd assume that they would be very, very extreme views that I was encountering when I was trying to talk to these people and understand them. And certainly I did find there were some rather extreme pro-cloth nappy advocates. But more than that, I found a greater sense of unbiased information than I'd been expecting. People who are prepared to give advice and support, not always saying they're fantastic, because let's be honest, there are pros and cons, which I'm not going to go into today, and it's not really the purpose of today, but I know all about them now. I also got more than that, and it was a genuine, unexpected sense of community. Now, what I did was I decided I will create a username for myself. I've never just done this in my life before. I will join this forum. I will be Lou FP, as I was back then. Okay, I've just revealed myself. I'm no longer active on the forum. I think it's okay. And what I found was something happened to me. And this is perhaps the purpose of today's research, to discover if what happened to me is in some way unique, if my experiences with this particular forum were in some way unique, or whether what happened to me could speak to a larger number of people in the world, in the audience, in the community. Okay. Because what I found was not only lurking, but after a while, as my baby arrived, I decided to actually post. I started to ask questions. I was overwhelmed with the kind of positive reaction I got within the supportive community, a very anonymous community, where nonetheless people seemed to really relate to each other and understand each other and warm to each other. It was something that was completely unexpected for me. What happened over time was I became much more aware that I knew quite a lot about this topic after all. I'd become something of a sad expert in this field, and I grew in confidence significantly in terms of my own abilities to start helping other people. So I was posting answers to questions rather than just actually posting questions themselves. I became somebody that people asked questions of because I seemed to know a lot of information, and it was a very empowering experience. And I had this surge of positive feeling as I was using the forum that I wanted to do something with, okay? And I think at this point it's worth thinking about what being on a forum actually is. It's quite small, this graphic, I'm sorry, I couldn't blow it up too much larger. But what we're trying to do, and this is similar to some of the graphics that Julie showed earlier, trying to get a sense of where in this ladder of connectivity forums sit. Now, according to this, you have forums basically in the spectator section, where all you're doing is lurking, which is what I was doing to start with. Further up, you've got contributing to online forums in the critics section. I think this is true too, but I also believe there is more to it than that. And the thing that Julie was talking about was this real sense of online community, people having conversations. And that is really not captured in this graphic because we seem to stop below the conversationalist section in terms of online forums, according to this research. We believe there was rather more to it than that. Even more than just having conversations, we started to wonder if there was some kind of groundswell of activity that could be garnered by involvement with these forums, that users could become very, very motivated to actually engage in offline civic activity in support of the very thing that they'd sought information about in the first place. So, what happened next? This is me. This is me for a moment being a little bit famous, okay? What did I do? I suspect this could have happened anyway, but I don't think so. I basically decided to get more involved in my local community, getting people to understand more about the very thing that I didn't really know about when I was looking for information about cloth nappies. So I became an independent advisor for a retailer where I'd go into people's homes, parents-to-be, and demonstrate the pros and cons of different kinds of nappies, which I would never have foreseen myself doing. I gave demonstrations at local hospitals, antenatal groups, just to try and show people what it was really like to use this rather strange medium of containing your baby's products, because actually most people just think of Pampers, or if they think of cloth nappies, they think of the Terry Squares, which we were all in as babies, and boiling and soaking. It's all just doesn't happen in that way anymore. It's very, very different. It's really evolved. People didn't get that. I was able to at least give them the choice and the information in, I hope, an unbiased way. And also the other byproduct of this was I started to get involved in the local media. So when it was Cloth Nappy Week every year, Gemini FM, as they used to be called, it's Heart now, I believe, would wheel me out to talk on the radio about what it was like to use cloth nappies. I also ended up being in the Express and Echo with my very unwilling and cooperative daughter Beatrice, who really didn't want her photograph taken at that time, wearing one of her nappies just to try and show to people that actually there is a very, very easy route through all this, and it's not anything like as difficult as we're led to believe. There are choices out there, and you can make the right choice for you. All of these things I did, I believe, because I was involved in a discussion forum. And what I'd like to do next is to hand you over to Jessica, because I think what she can do is perhaps give you a broader overview of what we've been doing the last few years. If I just say the research was to contextualise my own experiences, and was it actually the case that I was a little bit weird to end up doing all these things, or was the online process actually something that would translate to a broader audience?
So picking up on Louise's story, right, that was meant to tell you why you should care about online discussion forums, right? You really hear about how Louise is able to basically turn herself into an advocate for something that previously was just online, right? And I think maybe that's something that all of your organizations would like to do as well, right? Create advocates within the community, or people who are taking what's online into the offline world as well. So I'm going to handle these two sections, a broad overview of usage statistics for online discussion forums, and then talking about the meat of our project and our data and results. And then I'm going to hand you back over to Louise to talk about sort of bringing it back to the top-down perspective of what organizations can do with this information and whether you would actually like to try to implement an online discussion forum. Okay, so I think many people think of discussion forums as sort of just things that techies do, right? But it turns out they're actually quite popular and that people use them broadly, much more broadly than you might realize. So let me give you some statistics relative to the use of email, the use of Facebook, blogs, and wikis. I'm just going to show you two other forms of active use that you might think people are doing more. So I've got actively using forums, I've got posting weekly updates on Twitter, and I have writing a blog. And as you can see, in the UK, the USA, France, and Germany, people are actually using forums more than they're doing either of those other two things. Now, I'm not trying to say they're doing that more than they use email or more than they, for example, just log on to Facebook, but if you think about sort of the active use of forums, it's more than either of those other two things. So perhaps that's sort of an invisible layer of social media use, this type of social media use that people wouldn't necessarily have thought of. And when you think about that, why do people use these online media, with specifically discussion forums? They must be getting something out of it, right? So I think what they're getting out of CMC is an acronym for computer-mediated communication. What they're getting out of that is, just to think through it, the control over how they can present themselves to the outside world. So they can start by being anonymous if they want to. They don't have to be identified in the same way that you are on Facebook or for example, potentially Twitter. They can have higher levels of privacy if they want, and they have control over the amount of engagement they have. So if someone emails you, you kind of have to email them back, right? But if you are on an online discussion forum, you actually don't have to post, right? You don't have to respond to things. Other people will step up and do that. So you really can engage exactly on the level and on your own terms, right? At the level that you would like to. And that's really appealing for people. And the other benefit, just generally, of social media is finding like-minded people who aren't nearby. So in our own research, we often use online discussion forums, I'll show you some in a second, that are relating to potentially stigmatized types of things. So if somebody gets a health diagnosis that isn't similar to anything in their neighborhood, who do they talk to, right? They can go online to find people who know something about that, who aren't just geographically close to them. And specifically with online discussion forums, these are special and uniquely useful, partly because you get this sense of a larger community, not just the people you're connected to, right? LinkedIn, Facebook, you're connected to people you already know. Now you can be connected to people you would never have known, right? And also you're getting needs met that you couldn't get met face-to-face. Let me just show you a couple examples of really active social forums. So right here I've got the Green Living Forum, and if you look, you can see that there are hundreds of topics and posts. Right? This is a very active forum. Another one that we have used is the NetMoms forums, and I'm showing you the one for postnatal depression. And again, you can see there are actually huge numbers of posts and replies and views. These are examples of very, very successful online forums, right? These are organizations that are doing great things with their forums, right? Maybe more so than people would necessarily have realized. Okay, so to go back to our presentation. So let me talk about our project and results. So basically, as Louise told you, we noticed that the forum had actually, not just given her information, it also improved her actual sense of well-being and had turned her, you might argue, into an actual better citizen, right? A better person in the Southwest. So we wondered basically, is Louise unique, as she mentioned to you? And we thought that probably she isn't unique. Probably there's this widespread sort of invisible layer of people who are getting a lot of things out of the forum and then translating those things into offline impact. So we thought maybe her experience is actually more typical than we realized. And we wanted to, as we're experimental psychologists, we set out to document and then try to explain the benefits that we thought we were seeing anecdotally. So to talk about documenting the benefits, we basically break these into three aspects. And the first one is getting needs met that people realize they have going in, but then also getting needs met that maybe they didn't realize they had or didn't know the forum was going to meet. So we try to look at getting needs met above and beyond what you even expected going in. And then we also are looking at improvement in people's sense of subjective well-being and satisfaction with life. So that's the intrapsychic, that's the individual level of benefit, and then taking that offline into action and engagement. So that's sort of community level of benefit. And instead of showing you all the data, I thought I would just give you a couple quotes from people talking about what they got out of, after months and potentially years of engagement on the forum. So for example, you can see a user named Stacy M who says, "I like being part of the support network and knowing that I might be helping someone." And she says, "There are so few other people I know face-to-face, I wouldn't have been able to get support in the real world." So really is meeting a need, and we can show that more quantitatively as well, but I thought I would just show it to you in this way. So in terms of having evidence for those benefits, right, the meeting the needs, the subjective well-being, and then the offline impact, now that we've shown that those benefits occur, we want to try to explain them. And this is where we get to a concept that's a sort of very social psychological concept of identification. So in our field within the past, say, 15 or 20 years, there's been an explosion of work showing that coming to feel identified with other people, coming to feel like you're part of a larger collective, you're part of something bigger than yourself, is actually really important for both mental and physical health, right? So I'm showing you a couple of books, one called Loneliness, one called The Social Cure, and a magazine, Scientific American Mind, where there was a feature article about the importance of identification. All of these basically say people do better in life and going through the world if they feel connected to and sort of merged with others. And we thought maybe that's the key in our findings as well with the online forum, that people felt isolated before and they felt like they had no one to talk to, but now they've come to feel identified with other people, and that's really driving all of these other benefits we've shown. So one clue to that might be the fact that average level of identification is very high in our forums. So if you think about us asking on a 1 to 7 scale how identified people feel, and you think about these are in our initial samples, we have 2 cloth nappy forums, Cloth Nappy Addicts and Cloth Nappy Tree, and then a third one, Baby Center, and then we have 2 others as comparison, Golf Magic and Muscle UK. So these are people who are sort of hobby-based golfers, right? And then also bodybuilders. And the average level of identification with this forums is shockingly high, right? People in those cloth nappy forums are sometimes reporting, between 6 and 7 on a scale of 1 to 7. That is incredible levels of identification, incredible levels of community building. And if you can really translate that into something for your organization, you're really getting somewhere, right? It's not just nothing, right? It's not just people logging on for information. It really is a sense of community. So then we sort of developed this model in which identification is the driving factor that creates these other benefits that you might care about. And what causes identification is a match or exceeding of what you hoped you get out of it. You get more out of it than you even realize. And we actually have two quite large samples. So I'm going to show you some data from the second large sample. And in that sample, we had over 250 members of a range of online forums. So forums relating to cloth nappy use, yes, but also forums relating to postnatal depression, to mental health, to green living, and just a variety of other ones as well. And people report on all aspects of this model. So whether the forum met or exceeded their expectations, how identified they feel with the other people in the forum, and then their well-being and their tendency to sort of act out in the world as well. So you can see that the more people feel identified with the forum, the more they're reporting high levels of subjective well-being as well. I'm not sure how much you guys are used to looking at correlations, but they range between -1 and 1, and these are quite strong correlations. So people who had higher levels of identification reported more subjective well-being on the mental health forum, also on the postnatal depression forum. Those are strong relationships, right? Really important relationships. And then less so on the green living forum and in a sample of people who are sort of across a bunch of forums. So you can see there's a really strong relationship with whether the forum is one that meets a need you couldn't talk to people around you about. If you have that need, then coming to feel identified with members of the forum really is helpful for your mental health, right? For your well-being. And it turns out that the type of forum isn't all that important in terms of predicting offline action. Identification does predict offline action for all of the types of forums we looked at. So there are, again, strong relationships in all of these forums, and even here too, right? And once we know that, we can do some statistical modeling looking at whether the benefits for well-being and offline action are driven by the identification. And it turns out that when people agree that the forum has met or exceeded their expectations in terms of wanting to seek information, wanting to share information with others, and wanting to form new relationships, people do come to feel more identified with the forum. But that's primarily driven by forming new relationships, right? And they come to feel they have more subjective well-being, and that forum identification drives that relationship between meeting or exceeding your needs for forming new relationships and having better subjective well-being. So really what I would say you want to take away as an organization is that you want to be able to piggyback on people using forums to create a sense of community, because they get something out of that, and maybe you can get something out of that for your organization as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back over to Louise to talk about that, again, transitioning to an organizational perspective.
Okay, so as an organisation, are you going to want to be using forums more than you already do? Well, it's obviously going to be a case of horses for courses, and I'm not going to try and say that everyone should be having online forums as part of their organisational social networking activity, but there are a number of points that we find in our research could be very helpful for you when you're considering shouldn't we think about having some kind of online forum presence as part of our online activity. And a recurrent theme that we find really seems to crop up is the kind of topic that the forum exists to serve. And where we've got topics that are particularly sensitive, perhaps in some ways stigmatised, or perhaps we're talking about it being difficult to find people who are like you in the community very easily nearby, these are the sorts of questions you might ask yourself. Do I have users who have got any of these sorts of needs? Perhaps in this situation, an online forum would be worth entertaining. Perhaps you are already engaging in face-to-face groups, meetings with your clients. Yes, that does happen. We had a look through the list of people here today, and we know that in some organisations you are getting users together to talk about their experiences. It does happen. Sometimes, though, it's not always easy to get people in the same room. Perhaps an online presence, an online discussion forum could be a way of getting your users talking to each other about the specific topics associated with your organisation. It may be that's a really relevant sort of direction to go in. You will be able to do this provided you have, as Julie was saying, not just a kind of technical savvy. It's actually very easy to set up a forum. It's not something that you need a lot of technological know-how to do, but what you do need to have are people who can run it for you, people who can moderate the content and make sure that fair play is being seen to happen. So you want to make sure that you can have some staff time or possibly interested users who you know and trust within the organisational client base who can spend some time moderating and ongoing management of the particular forum, because it isn't something that just runs itself. I think that's an important point. So if you're thinking that these sorts of things might be relevant to you, come and talk to us afterwards and we can certainly give you our own advice and opinions on that. Because there are a number of benefits that accrue from having online discussion forums, provided they are what you need for your organisation and for your clients. Obviously, you're going to increase your armoury of online service provision. You're providing a new medium for your people to talk to each other. But more than that, for your users, you're creating a sense of community and you're getting a more widespread access to information in place for your users as part of that community. And you can't underestimate the power of that for galvanising and empowering your customer base. In terms of what you get immediate feedback. You can see what they're saying about your organisation. You can get ideas about how to develop certain avenues in the future. And you can do so in a very, very real-time snapshot kind of way as it actually happens. You can see what people are saying about you. And then perhaps the final point is that you are able, if you have got a very online supportive community, as was my own experience, to harness that collective power to create social change. I don't think it's too much of a step to make this point. I think my own experiences were not atypical. Our research is now bearing that out. Several years ago, the late Patricia Radin said, by their very existence, online forums are planting the seeds of revolution. Now, she did this before Facebook had really gotten hold, but I do believe that alongside these more traditional social media that we are seeing emerging more recently, online forums have a massive role to play in helping organisations realise their potential and actually harnessing the power of their users. There are, of course, some pitfalls, and I have to talk you through those because obviously it would be very one-sided of me to just focus on the benefits. When you have an online forum, you're giving up control over the content and the message. Your users take over to some extent, and they may air views and opinions that are difficult to hear, actually. You may want to hear them. Some may actually undermine the role of the forum, which is to provide a supportive space in which for people to discuss things. And you have to find a very fine balance between intervening and letting them help each other, the sort of self-help idea that forums exist for people to exchange information, ideas and support, and very much help themselves. We had lots of quotations from our moderators that I'll just show you one today, which just sums this up. One of the NetMums moderators said, "We find that we need to keep a balance between professional support and allowing the community to respond." And it is certainly the case that organisations such as NetMums have a massive armoury of support from their moderators and parental support advisors to ensure that the trolls that can exist on some of these discussion forums are stamped on, that also the boards actually take on a life of their own. One thing that NetMums told us was, we realised as we started to do these forums that there needed to be more diversification. We had, for example, one mental health forum for our parents, but we realised that we needed to split between postnatal depression and other mental health issues. Since we've done that, the kind of contact and visits that we're getting on those forums now has really escalated because we are meeting the client's needs, we are responding to their own needs, and we are actively evolving into the kind of service that they want to see us providing. So if all of this has enthused you at all, if you're an organisation who thinks you could benefit from this, we would be happy to discuss your situation with you one-to-one in the surgery session that's going to be held later on today. All that remains now is for me to just thank a few people. Thanks to Steve, obviously, I haven't put him on here, for helping us get this set up in the first place, and to Alan, who's just held our hand all the way through. He's marvellous. We've also got lots of other people who've helped us with colleagues and also other students along the way who've contributed to our research over the years, because it has been going quite a while now. Some contact details there for you. If you'd like to know more information, there's our email addresses for you. Again, just grab us in the coffee session or the lunch session or the surgery session. We're very, very happy to talk about this. We're very excited about this opportunity. Okay, thank you very much.